Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, I want to go over financing, and specifically what I want to go over is what you can do throughout the financing process in order to increase your likelihood of getting that loan and minimizing your stress to the extent that you can. Now understand that if you are getting a mortgage, all right, chances are it's going to be a stressful process. There's no way around that. I always tell everyone, listen, if you are dealing with a mortgage, chances are that you are going to get frustrated, but that's all part of the process because it's just a very difficult process. Now, I myself this year have bought 2 investment properties. Both of them were financed. And as of yesterday, I finalized the refinance of my commercial building. I want to go over what I learned in this process, which is not what I learned, it's just kind of what I wrote down throughout the process that I want to share with you so I can increase your likelihood of having success when you're out there. Before we keep going, can I just ask you for a quick favor? If you all could give us a like and subscribe down below, it would mean the world to us because it allows us to amplify our message. Once again, I really appreciate having so many of you watch and engage with this channel, and I look forward to continue making these videos for you. And now, back to the show. If this is your first time here, I'm Jonathan Alfonso. I'm a real estate attorney and real estate broker based out of Miami, Florida. My goal with these videos is to provide you guys with the knowledge that I have gained over the last 12 years transacting in real estate. So let's jump right into it. And before I jump into it, let me tell you a little bit about my objectives so you can understand and you can apply it to your scenario, and you can hopefully understand why it is that I come up with these certain rules. This year, for example, I knew I wanted to achieve 2 things within the financing realm. One was I wanted to pick up another investment property. And number 2, I knew I was going to have to refinance my commercial building because the loan on my building had a 5-year balloon note. For those of you that don't know, a balloon note basically is a note that'll say that after X amount of time, the loan will be called and you have to basically pay it off by that date certain. In my circumstance, I had a 5-year balloon note and it was due this year, so I was going to have to refinance it. Now, that being said, starting last year, I started preparing myself for this process. So what did that mean? Started researching loan products, both the on the investment side and the commercial side. I started preparing my financials. What did my credit score look like? I wanted to make sure, for example, that my credit score stayed above 740 so I could qualify for a lot of these loan programs. The other thing too was my income, right? So I was planning ahead for all of these things. How can I minimize some expenses and how can I make sure that 2021 is an extremely profitable year? Also started increasing my salary that I paid to myself from one of the companies in order, when I went to apply, make sure that my income looked from the bank's perspective as high as possible, because on average they're going to take 2 years of tax returns. They're also going to look at your salary. So I've been kind of for like 12 months been preparing myself for this entire process to make sure that I was in an attractive financial position to be able to qualify. This leads me to my second point, right? Now, no matter how much you plan ahead and no matter how much you handle certain situations, there are just things on your finances that you're going to have to explain, or things that you may have set up in a certain way. If you foresee any issues in your financing, or anybody in speaking to you tells you about issues that you have with your financing, and you need to move forward at a certain point, you're going to want to disclose those issues. One of the things that I always tell everyone is I am radically transparent. I think it's very important that when you're negotiating with people that you are as transparent as possible without prejudicing yourself, and that applies for when you're going with your financing. So if you know you have a certain issue, or you know that something is in your financials that may become an issue, then you're going to want to address it. So for example, one of the things that came up in financing of the second property that I had was that we were coming up on the date that my mortgage on my commercial building was going to have to refinance. One of the underwriters brought this up, basically made the argument, well, what are you going to do if you can't refinance a building, and then what if you need to liquidate properties? And I'm like, it was a very convoluted scenario that came up with the underwriter, but I realized that they were going in a direction I didn't want to, and the appraisal ended up coming in lower, so I needed to switch lenders anyways. And I said, you know what? I moved to another lender. When I moved to the next lender, I told them, look, this is the issue that we're having, all right, and this is what I wanted to do. Instead of trying to go to another lender and pretend it never happened, which is something I see people do, I said, listen, these are the issues, and can we work around this? And they said yes, and we went that route. We started to deal with it, but whatever it is, I can't tell you how many times people get towards the end and they're not up front. For example, I have seen closings where we were like a few days away from closing, and one of the individuals didn't tell anybody that they had changed jobs. There was a whole verification issue. There was all these things. So if you know certain things are coming down the pipe, you're going to want to get ahead of them, because otherwise you could get yourself in trouble. My third tip when you're going through the pre-approval and loan process is be very organized. to the extent that you can organize all your documents, I would do so. For example, I keep my documents all on a drive. They're very organized by company, by year. I keep them by different types of accounts. I have all the statements in there. All of these things, you're going to want to have them very organized. And then my tip is, as you get the list of documents from your lender, which, listen, they typically tend to be the same types of list of documents. They're going to want 2 years of tax returns. They're going to want 4 most recent pay stubs. Typically, they're going to want to see 2 months of bank statements. As you organize them in your whatever system you currently have, I started to keep a folder on my desktop where, as I went sending documents to the lender, I would put them all in there. Why? Because no matter what, even if you send them to the lender, whether through their portal or you send them through emails, what ends up happening a lot of times is they're going to send it to someone else, then someone else didn't get it, or it got lost, or it didn't get uploaded, and they're going to ask you for the same document again. And then you might have to go through your system and go through like 6 folders, whereas you can have it on your desktop ready to go. And another sub tip that I have is, don't just download these documents and then, like, for example, like I noticed something that, like, when I was downloading my accounts from Chase is, you know, they give it this very generic number and they're all in there. What I typically do is I rename my documents. So I've had this same naming system for a while where I'll typically put the year, so 2022, I'll put the month, 08, let's say for August, and then I'll write the name of what it is, and I'll be as descriptive as possible without making it too long. So let's say it's a Chase account, you know, JJA Chase, I would put, for example. This way, let's say your lender asks you for it again, all right, you can quickly go into that folder, find it, you can quickly upload it and send it again. Or in the alternative, let's say they ask you and you know you already sent it and you're on the road, I would be like, hey, it was in that last email, it's labeled, you know, this, and they would be like, oh my God, yes, I missed it, I didn't upload it, and it's there. So the more organized you can be, because if your file names are just these like long series of letters, then what ends up happening is every time they ask you for a document, you're like, oh, I uploaded it. You go clicking around and then you're trying to click on each document to see which one it is. So the more organized you can be, the quicker you can kind of get this all to your lender, and the quicker you can move the process. Remember, at every stage of the process, whenever they ask you for something, it kind of stops the game from moving forward, and then they always get to say, well, we're waiting on you. So the quicker that they can be, we need this, and you're like, well, wait a second, here it is, and you can send it to them, then the quicker you're moving the ball along. This leads me to my 4th tip, which is follow up with them. Now remember, you always want to walk that fine line between being persistent and on top of it and being annoying. So there's always kind of like a gray line in there, but just kind of follow their own deadline. So let's say they ask you for documents every time I send them, hey, listen, what's next? Okay, it's this, and this. You know, we should be back to you in 72 hours. Okay, no problem. Set a reminder, you know, keep a mental note, 72 hours, reach out again. Now, don't send the documents if they say 72 hours and I'll call 8 hours later and be like, hey, do you have an update for me? Because, you know, they're going to stick to that 72 hours. So I just kind of make it a point to follow their cadence and their rhythm, but be on top of them. Don't just automatically assume. Remember, mortgages, like everything else, is a volume game. Chances are they have other loans, they have other priorities, and just understand where you are in the pecking order. Even on the commercial refi that I finished yesterday, you know, I had good conversations with my banker throughout, you know, trying to understand, and he would be like, look, I got these other 2 big deals, but, you know, I'm pushing yours along. Hey, no problem. I get it. At the end of the day, I would love to be somebody's only client. I would love some preference. I understand there's other people in line, but they have a $5 million deal. I get it. Our loan was only for a little bit under $1 million. I get all of those parameters. Just tell me where I fall. Tell me how we can move it along. But, you know, stay on top of it. And this happened to me, for example, with my second deal, which was one of the investment loans, which at one point, and this is a whole other video because the lender actually went under and I ended up having to find a lender on the fly. Like, I was on top of them. The updates I was getting, I wasn't very happy with because it was very apparent to me they weren't working the file, you know, just by the communication. So you're going to want to follow up, because having the communications, you can tell the difference between I sent you a document, you overlooked it, I understand that. I sent you a document and you clearly haven't looked at it at all and you haven't read anything, because you are absolutely lost. You need to kind of walk that line so you can understand what's going on. My 5th tip, and this wasn't specifically for me, but I will definitely recommend it to everybody if you've never gone through the loan process, is make sure to keep people around you that are very knowledgeable and you can kind of check in at certain points. Like I'm saying, if you're following up, they're telling you certain things that are going on in the transaction, that you can, you know, double check whether what they are telling you is true, because it doesn't just relate to the loan, it could relate to the documents or what's going on, or it could relate to other processes. For example, I had on my second property, I had a major appraisal issue. Luckily, I, at the time, like having been in the business, understanding it, I was like, this appraisal is bad. This appraisal's no good. And you know what? I ended up saying, you know, I'm going to change and move over to a different lender. Meanwhile, you know, the lender was telling me, no, you could do this. And it was not what needed to happen. And they were trying to explain to me like, oh, we can possibly challenge the appraisal and we can get it done. And everybody in the business knows you're going to have a very hard time getting a lender to do away with their appraisal. Your best bet is usually to just change lenders. What you're going to want to do then is make sure that, you know, if you don't know the process very well, make sure your realtor understands it, or make sure you have a title agent, or, you know, anybody else that you can consult, so you can check and be like, listen, does this make sense? Should I be doing it? Because over time, the money start to add up, and you're really going to want to understand, like, is this something I want to do? Is this loan product something I want to get myself into, or do I potentially want to pivot? If I can give you one final piece of advice as you're going through all of this, because I literally just yesterday finished signing my last set of loan documents, and it was massive. And, you know, the entire time as I was doing all these deals and I was doing all of these transactions, you know, just remind yourself throughout the entire process, like, why it is that you're getting this loan, what your goal was. All right. And just remember that somebody out there, well, it's an institution, is going to lend you hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. And you're going to be able to do, you know, magical things with this money in the terms of, you know, you're building wealth for yourself and you're able to achieve some of your financial goals. Because that's something I constantly reminded myself, because I'm not going to lie, at certain points, I was so frustrated, especially with that second loan where, you know, I just had a transaction that I really wanted to get done, and I was just running into brick wall after brick wall with certain issues. And I'm going to do a whole other video just on that property. But, you know, I just kept reminding myself, because you know what? I also remember what my first loan was like. My first loan, I couldn't even get a loan back in 2010. I ended up having to do a hard money loan that we got from a family friend, but I was able to buy my first apartment for $75,000. And here I am today, where in the span of 4 months, I was able to pick up 2 more investment properties and refinance my commercial building. I was looking at the equity that I have in some of these properties and just thinking to myself, like, you know what, like, this is why we go through all of that. And understand too that a lot of these checks are in place, and while certain people are doing their job, listen, they're professionals. I'm not saying they're absolutely perfect, but listen, they're very good at what they do. You know, 2 of the individuals I used for my loans, I was very happy with them. Like, I understand at certain points there was frustrating things that we had to deal with, but that's the process. And if the process is done correctly by the loan officer, that means banks are doing their job correctly. They're properly vetting people, which means that these loans that are out there, when everybody says like, oh my God, there's so much money being lent, go through a loan process yourself and you will see that it's not that easy. It's pretty cumbersome, and banks are doing a pretty good job at vetting people and making sure that they do in fact qualify for these loans. So just remind yourself that you had an objective, celebrate the win, and remind yourself that you got here to the finish line, you got it done. Remind yourself why you're doing it all throughout the process, and at the end you will have a smile on your face if you implement some of the tips I just brought in. So do you have any horror stories going through financing? Do you have anything that you want to share about tips that you like to implement as you're going through the financing process? I'd love to hear them down below. I look forward to seeing you all in my next video. Thanks for watching.